Hello, and welcome to the Order of Initiative, a D&D podcast where me and my friends talk about Dungeons & Dragons, DMing, and everything to do with running the game. I'm Charles, and today we've got Nathan.
Hello.
Willis.
Hello.
And today we've got our first guest, Karma.
Hello.
Hi. So today, everyone, we're talking about character creation and character backstory and how a DM can guide them in kind of what we want to see from players when they're making their characters. But before we get into it, let's roll initiative. Hiya!
Come on,
15.
Gary needs a new pair of shoes. That's a 17.
Hey, it's good.
11.
It's a nice nat 1. Great way
Well,
to start the day.
Incredible.
You've probably heard, but if you get a nat 1, you actually aren't allowed to talk anymore. So
It was great having you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been great. I'd like to thank the Academy.
all right, who got the highest?
That'd be
Someone got
me.
17. All right,
So,
what you got?
yeah, well, character creation is, well, we've been doing a lot of sort of DM discussion, but I think this is sort of our first really big, more player character focused one. So I guess my first sort of topic would be, I think we discussed this in the last episode. I don't remember if this was then or in one later, but do people here usually like to go from a idea of their class and sort of race and stuff first, or do you come up with a character concept and go from there? What order do people like to go in?
It totally depends, like per character for me. I've started from so many different ideas. Sometimes I'm just like crossing off character classes I want to play. Like, hey, I've never done a blood hunter. I wonder what I can do with a blood hunter. And other times I have just this neat idea for a character and I make a class fit it. So I really like the idea of a spirit medium. What class makes the most sense for spirit medium? A warlock, I guess. And then it just kind of snowballs from there. So for me, it totally depends. It could be anything. Sometimes it's just a weapon. Like, I haven't had a sword dude in a while.
Yeah, I'm still sort of trying to work up, how do I want to make like a glaive character? Because the glaive's a cool weapon,
Ooh.
but I've never, put in the time to go play a fighter to do it. Yeah, I think I would agree with that for the most part. It depends a lot, but I think I definitely lean more towards the backstory first. It's hard for me to get excited about a character if I didn't come up with a cool theme to play off of with it. So usually it'll be something like, ooh, I want to play this, I guess a train conductor. What can I do with that?
Yeah, Carmen, this is kind of why I wanted you on the podcast, because I'm always fascinated with your characters, and they always seem to come from drastically different ideas and places. Is there a sort of like standard that you build a character from?
I wish I could say yes, but no, there is not. I have a very chaotic brain in the way it functions, and it could be something as simple as I've tripped going down the stairs and go, wow, that would make a phenomenal character concept, and then create something that has nothing to do with tripping down the stairs. I've
Marvelous.
went into character creation with the sole purpose of making them joke characters, and the one I have has now the longest written backstory, the most traumatic backstory. He's so well fleshed out. It's just so like I wish there was rhyme or reason to my personal character creation, but I do know the process I took for each character.
Did that development of that joke character come about from just thinking about it, or from like development at the table? Because that's actually something we talked about in a previous episode, like characters getting fleshed out at the table and how to deal with a joke character.
Well, that particular one was supposed to be a mock on myself and how much I love playing Wood Elf Druids, and he is a Wood Elf Druid. It was just supposed to be a mock of that. And then I found a piece of art on the internet that I loved, and I was like, no, I have to make this a sweet, traumatic idiot. He has to undergo so much pain.
That's another huge piece of inspiration for me. There's a lot of subreddits I follow that are just like character art and character concepts, and there's so many that make me go, oh, I gotta figure out how to make that a character, and like what class does this character seem like it would be. But Willis, what about you? Do you have any way you like tackle character creation?
So something that I like to do is I'll start with a twist where I'll look at like a common trope that there is, like the this seductive bard is probably one of the biggest ones, and then like think like, oh, how can I flip this on its head and do maybe like a bard that's just super against any sort of like touchy, they're physically distant from everybody, and kind of things like that, like
Away, foul temptress.
yeah. They a druid I was recently playing was I always see druids as like really in tune with nature, and I just happened to be in a setting where there were warforged, and I was like, what, kind of something that I think, Charles, you also were with me with this, and we were both kind of thinking about it like a druid who's in tune with nature, but is himself not from nature.
Super neat idea.
To bounce off of that, I am in a campaign where we have a Warforged druid that has no concept on how to interact with nature at all. So I actually went and asked that player how he came to the conclusion of building a Warforged druid, which two things that don't ever interact with each other, and his response was basically, I wanted to do something different.
I mean, yeah, sort of by complete coincidence, a D&D book just came out. I don't think it's an official D&D book, but it is by the guy who created the Eberron setting. I'm forgetting his name currently. But there was a subclass for I believe it's called Circle of the Forge druid, which is like pretty much specifically designed for Warforged druids to have more of a Transformers flavor to them, which is so hilarious because, Willis, you've been playing this Warforged druid who does exactly that for weeks and weeks now. We're like, did someone like find out that we're doing this? It's so perfect. And by the way, you've really pulled out a thread here by bringing up druids, because I believe Karma has like 8 druids.
7, thank you.
Oh, sorry, only
7.
7 druids.
I love them all dearly, and I would die for each and every one of them.
Hey, why druids? Why are you always drawn to druids?
Well, my first D&D character ever was a druid, and I had no idea how to play druid. That's another thing. When people are first getting into D&D and they're like, oh, maybe I'm looking into druid, I advise them against doing it, because druids have a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
But I don't stop them either.
Spellcasting in of itself is like complicated for a new player.
And druids just have a lot of things going on all at once, and I of course went for Moon Druid because why not? Let's make it even more complicated than it has to be. But I love nature, I love plants, and I approached my first character. I was like, I'm gonna put myself into this character, and I put too much of myself in the character, that's besides the point. And then it just, again, became more of a meme with me and a mock on myself of how much I love druids, that now I just feel the need to play every druid circle.
I mean, I can relate to a lesser extent. I'm always drawn to warlocks. I think there's just so much inherent role playing and like just background built into them. The idea of being tied to a more powerful entity is just, there's so many ways you can take that.
I agree.
I can also relate very strongly because I'm the exact same way with Rangers. I just play Rangers.
Which is, I've never played a Ranger.
You shouldn't. They're really bad.
They've gotten better, okay? They've gotten a little better.
Yeah, they've gotten some good subclasses, and I'm very happy with them. But,
Isn't the Unearthed Arcana a little better?
Yeah, they've got some good UA stuff, and Gloomstalker is actually fantastic. But it just hurts me that, those vanilla subclasses, Hunter and Beastmaster, are just so underwhelming.
I think flavor-wise, they just never really interested me, because a Ranger seems like a middle ground between like a fighter and a druid. and it doesn't seem to have like the coolness of either,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
And the other thing about Rangers is that they're so like geared to be like super useful in certain situations, and then if the DM never throws those situations at the Ranger, then they're just kind of in the background.
Yeah.
You know, kind of. I shoot my bow. All right.
Well,
Is it my turn again? I shoot my bow.
the real problem is that even when you are put in those situations where you're supposed to be useful, you're not, because the designers, back in 2012 when they were making the edition, were afraid to make them too powerful when it was their niche. Because back in 3.5, when you get all these modifiers added onto stuff versus your favorite enemy, it's once again very situational. So they wanted to pull away from making you as situational as you are. So even when you are against your favorite enemy, all you get is an advantage on intelligence and wisdom checks against them.
That's true.
That's the Ranger's built-in base mechanic, and it's useless.
I feel like the Matt Mercer Blood Hunter is kind of a more realized version of what Rangers should have been. Like, they're monster hunters. They're experts in fighting monsters, and I feel like Rangers should have leaned into that more so, that rather than being like so specific.
It's I think that's sort of the way I like to go with them these days. I think the original intent with them was to for them to be masters of the exploration pillar, and they're really good at that. But
so
what games have you been in recently where survival was a big part of the game?
Yeah.
None.
So they end up sort of falling flat.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
So we were talking about kind of twists on characters and things. How do you guys approach a character that you've got an idea for this character, but to build them the way that you want them, it makes their class kind of hamstringed? I guess, how do you guys deal with hamstringing your characters for the purpose of story and, like, characterization?
What do you mean by hamstring? Like,
So, like, somebody wants to play a stupid wizard, a wizard that's, like, real dumb. Now, it's, a fun idea, but if your wizard has a really low intelligence score, like, it's going to be a real hard time, or, like, a really weak fighter,
I think you can, like, the stats on your sheet don't have to be what you're playing them as, necessarily. Like, if you want to be like a kind of airhead wizard, play them as an airhead. Their intelligence modifier is high, but whatever. That's not their personality necessarily.
I also feel like it's also a matter of perspective for each dungeon master and how they want to rule that. In the campaign I run, I do have a druid who's not only an amnesiac, he's very stupid, and the player wants him to play him very stupid, but he has really high intelligence and wisdom modifiers. So when I ask him to roll intelligence checks, like history checks on things that there's no way in heck this man can know of it, I have him roll at disadvantage, and sometimes I'll put his DC significantly higher than any other player's because he can roll all he wants, and I also rule it as, even if he gets a nat 20 on some things, like, there's no way you're going to know that. Doesn't matter what you roll.
And is the player aware of those changes or tweaks you're making to his rolls?
He is very much aware of that, and because again,
and they're cool with it.
When he went into it building that character, I said, listen, there's some things. Well, I told all of my players this, like, it's going to be particular on how your character is. Like, of course, like, I play fair, and I don't just like, oh, you get an automatic disadvantage on every intelligence check ever. Like, I give them fun things from time to time. He met some angels recently, but, 'cause why not? But, basically it's more of, he wants to play an amnesiac that's stupid. So, even though he has a really, really high intelligence modifier, there are certain things that if he rolls on, I do impose, like, disadvantage or a higher DC, and I've explained this to all of my players that that's how I do things. Like, if there's something your character absolutely would have little to no information on, your DC is going to be higher.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as long as he's cool with it, and you're cool with it, then that's really all that matters. There's definitely been times when and I might lean into this even more in the future, where like if the characters find like a magical artifact, and the character who's lived in a nomadic tribe their whole life and never cast a spell wants to roll, I might say like, there's no way in hell you would even know. So no, you're not allowed to roll on this. Do you guys feel like that's a fair ruling to tell someone there's no feasible way you'd ever know?
Right.
Absolutely.
I've done that as well too.
Usually for situations like that, I will, rather than say, make a roll, I will call out specific members of my party who can make the roll and say, you go ahead. And usually it's based on, like, proficiency. Like, if there's this ancient, deep, mysterious, arcane secret, only way that you even have a chance of knowing that is if you're proficient in Arcana.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to do it rather than shutting down people. Just call on people to begin with. What when it comes to like building your characters in the first place, or rather your party building characters, are there certain things you ask for them? I know like we have the general idea of like we want to ask for motivations, long-term and short-term goals, but beyond that, is there anything you want from your players?
Oh yeah, I've got a big one. Why is your character willing to work with the party? Like what like what kind of makes them a team player? They've got to have a reason to be in this group.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one, because if you're making a character who is a loner and a lone wolf, and they can take care of themselves and they don't need anyone.
I work alone.
Why are you at the party? Like, make someone who's social enough to be part of a team effort, because it is a team. No one's the main character. You're a cast of characters. I totally agree, Willis. That's very important.
And along similar lines, once again, I think there's like 2 bare minimums that you need to have to even, have a relevant D&D character. Is that they need to be able to work with the party, and 2, they need to be willing to go out and adventure. This is a game about adventuring, and if you want to play the bookish nerd who's too afraid to leave the city walls to go loot the dungeon, then why are you playing D&D?
See, I've played a character who had that mindset, but I didn't really push it. It was just sort of kind of for laughs. Karma, it's Victor. Victor, the wizard, who, like, I don't know if I got a chance to actually do this, but I always had this idea in my back pocket where if we came across, like, someone who was murdered, right, or a plot to destroy the city, Victor would have just been like, all right, here's what we do. We go get the guards.
I would like to say that,
knowing that the party is probably going to push back and be like, no, we should probably do this. He'd be like, shit, fine.
See, I like that because it prompts like sort of role playing between the group, and it's a little funny thing, gets a little laughs.
Yeah.
But the characters are just like, no, I'm not leaving and following this adventure because it's too dangerous. And just puts their foot down. That's as a DM, I'd say, all right, cool. Bob, the cowardly wizard, stays behind. The rest of the adventures go off. Roll up a new character. You're not going to be part of the party. Then play someone else.
We had a moment like that in one of your campaigns, Charles, where we broke into a meat factory and found a bound Tarask like leagues below the surface, and we're like, well, it looks like you guys have everything under control here, and we just noped out. And then, lo and behold, the Tarask breaks out and destroys the city.
As they do.
And I set up that like the chains were weakening and there were earthquakes rocking the city, and it's something I still think about. That you guys were like, oh, and also there was a huge tunnel like right near it that clearly had like climbed its way out of.
I think that was the first session I played with you too.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
And you guys are all just like, sounds good. Seems like you got it under control. Bye. So yeah, needing like characters that are willing to socialize at least a little bit. Like you can still be antisocial or even awkward and weird, and you can play a character like that. But ultimately, you should go with the flow, right? You should join the party and help them out.
This talk of a scared character that doesn't want to go adventuring has geared me up for another character concept, but it's fine.
Incredible. Glad we could help.
Something I also think about is characters who you want to be around,
Oh,
And you can have a
yeah.
character who's grumpy or maybe a little rough around the edges,
But still
but
endearing.
keep in mind, yeah, on some level, like be a grumpy old dad. Don't be basically don't be an asshole. I've played with too many people who seem to want to play assholes and
Mm.
not endearing assholes. They're just assholes. And what I
And
want to remind people is the rest of the party has to be around this character, so you really should be making someone that people are going to want to interact with.
one of my least favorite campaign interactions and experiences was I rolled up a druid, of course I did, and I get into this. We had a massive group of people, and one of the players was playing a tiefling rogue, which is already a little bit cliche, but you know what? I'm okay with cliches. I play wood elf druids, okay? I'm a cliche.
Mm-hmm.
But he played the stereotypical I'm an edgelord and my
Oh,
parents were
No.
killed and
My
I'm
parents are
sad.
dead.
And it made playing with that character so difficult. And there
yeah.
was a romance between my character and his character, and he
Oh
asked her
no.
to marry him at one point, and she was like, I gotta go. But it's just being around players that are likable. He was a very difficult character to find redeeming qualities about. And I hate saying that. It just was very difficult to play with that character.
No, I know what you mean. I think a lot of us had to deal with that guy or edgelords in general. And
Or we've been that guy, because I know I
I was
have.
gonna say Nathan and I are both recovering edgelord addicts, I'm pretty sure. My first
name's
character
Nathan, and I was
was
an edgelord.
my first character was absolutely an edgelord, and then I had another one who was an ex-Jedi who was in love with another Jedi, and then a Sith killed her, and then the Jedi Order wouldn't let him get revenge, so he left the Order, and it's edgy.
It's
Shand the Doormaster.
It's so hard because when that stuff comes up in popular culture and media and stuff like that, it's super cool, but it only works because it's controlled every aspect, and when we try and do it, it just
I think the big thing is because when you're watching a show like The Witcher, your perspective is most of the time through Geralt. You're seeing the world through his eyes, and sure, he seems like an asshole, but you're identifying with him more, and so it's fun because you're the one being the asshole. In D&D, you get that experience playing that character, but you also have to deal with 4 other people where, in their mind, they're the main character, and here comes this asshole.
I actually don't think Geralt is that much of an edgelord. He is aesthetically with all black and white hair, and he's a badass, but he's very witty and very sassy and cocky, and all of those small tweaks to the edgelord trope, I think, evolved him beyond that stereotype.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is that Geralt is written very, very well, and your edgelord D&D character you're coming up with, where you're taking Geralt's surface qualities and turning them into a character, is probably, to the layman, probably not going to be that same level of intricacy.
On another level, Geralt, there's a lot more going on underneath the surface, which I think is kind of what you were touching on. Geralt is sort of trying to come off as a badass edgelord, and there's there's rumors that Witchers don't have emotions, and that's not true, but he leans into it to help this facade that he puts on. And so there's a lot of complex emotions to Geralt, but like you said, Nathan, I think people just latch onto the grumpy badass and don't have anything else going on underneath that.
I really love when people take, since we're talking about traditional stereotypes and Willis was talking about before, and twist them. I made a Raven Queen warlock fighter multiclass.
Jeez.
She's a dark elf. By all accounts, she should be this dark brooding edgelord, and she sings and she combs her hair and she's a very pleasant person to be around. And the edgiest thing about her is that because of who she worships, she just views beauty and death.
I like that.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
I think mindset definitely goes a long way in terms of like curving the edgelord thing. There was a Reddit thread about this, like how is it possible to make a blood hunter that's not an edgelord? And one of the comments that helped out me in my creation of making a blood hunter basically said like change their outlook. Like they can be badass and strong in a monster hunter, but make them a positive person. And I think that that's something I think about a lot. Being a positive person as a character can really shape who a character is.
Yeah, because I think that one important thing to look at is that your class is basically, and I know we've talked about basically the inverse of this before, but as an adventurer, your class is just your job. It's not your personality. And I know, like we said, we've talked about this before, and class really isn't your job, it's your background, but sort of in the context of you as an adventurer, you're a blood hunter because you can do these things. It's not because you're this edgy bastard. And anybody could be a blood hunter.
So,
Yeah.
While we're kind of on the subject of classes, to kind of steer us back to the original guiding character creation, do you guys ever push your players into certain, not quite classes, but maybe roles in the party? Like maybe if you've got a bunch of smash 'em ups and you're worried that everybody's going to feel kind of, like they're competing to be the, smashiest smasher, and you think maybe that wouldn't be fun for this particular player. I guess my question is, do you guys ever push your players into certain classes or roles for whatever reason?
No, never.
I have been forced into the healer class too many times. Not class, but role. I will never, ever... If my party wants to be 5 mages, not a single tank, not a single DPS, not a single healer, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, my philosophy on this is I will make the party aware what roles have been selected, and I will say, play what you want, but if you care about the roles at all, here's the information. Make your own choices.
Same. Go ahead, finish your thought.
Yeah, one of my more recent games started off with 2 fighters and 2 sorcerers, and it was a goddamn blast.
Yeah, I'll never... Oh, the only thing I'll really say is, like, I'll usually try to push people away from being 2 of the same class. So 2 barbarians can get kind of underwhelming. I feel like you're sort of sharing the spotlight if you're literally the same class, but a fighter and a barbarian, sure, go for it. I think sometimes you can actually set up fun rivalries, like in Willis, in the campaign you're in. There's Aligrax, a Dragonborn barbarian, and Vigordir, a Goliath Skald, which is like a bard barbarian combo. And like when I heard they both wanted to do that, I actually got really excited because they're both big, beefy boys. And then to a further extent, being a Dragonborn and Goliath, descended of dragon and giant blood, which are infamously rivals in the setting, that just sets up a perfect rivalry. And it's kind of gone that way. They competed in an arm wrestling contest against each other. And I love the idea of having 2 buff guys in the party who are constantly trying to one-up each other.
I have a question on this topic, and it's, when you guys are DMing, do you let your party form organically, or do you like let them talk about like their backstories and their character classes and stuff and what they have? Because when I went into my campaign, I told my players, I said, I don't want you guys to talk about what race and class you're playing. I want this to form organically, and that's how I ended up with 2 druids. But I
think I more or less leave it up to them. Like when starting a new campaign, I'll say, hey, if any of you want to know each other, feel free. That always kind of helps with that first session get together. I may have said this before, but even if you've been playing with a group for like 20 years, I feel like as soon as you roll up new characters and you have to have them all meet, it's awkward. Every first session is awkward. So any like ties that characters can have to each other alleviates that a little bit. But at the same time, as a DM, I enjoy coming up with a situation to tie everyone together. I feel like this could go into another topic, but I'll say it anyway. I think about like coming up with an exciting incident that ties everyone together. So like in the campaign Willis is in, they were all joining the same organization, and they were all paired together to fight in this trial by combat, essentially. And that immediately bonds them together. I've done other campaigns where they're all slaves on a ship together. There's a lot you can do to, in a way, sort of force them together. Create an external threat that threatens everyone and forces them to bond together.
That's a good way to do it. I admittedly am a big fan of the tavern start because it doesn't require a lot of effort on my part, but I'm keenly aware of the flaws in it, as it does sort of lend greatly to this awkward first session that really can't be avoided.
Yeah.
But I think, to answer your question, Karma, I think it really does depend. I think most of the time I do prefer that my party discuss amongst themselves beforehand. Because, like I said, I do play with people that like to consider roles in the party, and I think they'd like to be able to discuss amongst themselves what kind of game they're going to be playing. And then, at the same time, if they don't want to talk to each other about it, then I'm totally cool with that as well, and then it leads into a session where everyone is surprised. I especially, I guess, don't want them talking about their backstories a whole lot with each other, because I really like that, that soap opera sort of stuff where they all got secrets that they're keeping from each other, because this random elf I met on the road, he has no business knowing my secrets.
Yeah.
I love that too.
So I had a sort of both sides of the same coin in one character where I played a character that I wanted to know what everybody else was so that I could make my character, kind of differ and stand out from the rest of the cast so that I would have my own, kind of unique thing. But I also made my character with a secret. So when I made this character, and the way he was introduced was just as a human with magical powers. And besides that, nobody really knew what he was. And a few of the more experienced players kind of figured out pretty quickly that he was a warlock. But they didn't end up finding out until quite a few sessions down the road that he was actually a tiefling. That kind of did sort of a He-Man transformation when he summoned his Pact of the what is it, the
Blade?
Pact of the Blade, yes.
Yeah, it's a little tropey, but I think it's a good trope to have character secrets. It like Nathan said, it's kind of a soap opera moment, but it's so fun to figure out what's going on with everyone else in your party.
And that's why I logistically understand discussing beforehand, and I know I've advised players hey, I'll tell players oh, you're gonna have another druid in the party. Are you still okay being a druid? Because there's sometimes overlap, and sometimes players don't like that overlap. But I did communicate a lot with my players before I started, and they all were okay with everything. But I bring it up because the first campaign I was in, my DM was very adamant, do not talk about your character, your class. I want everything to form organically, you're just a bunch of couple of kids, just people that randomly decided to go after this thing for whatever reasons. And we ended up with 3 wood elves, 2 tieflings, 2 halflings, and a dwarf.
Oh boy.
That's wild.
I guess that's the downside to it. But at the same time, it I don't know, maybe the DM could sort of sway people, okay, maybe tiefling, and he goes, not a tiefling. I don't know. I do love the idea of not even knowing what class anyone else is, and then in your first fight with them, you're you see him goes, okay, I shoot Eldritch Blast. You're so he's a warlock. Or maybe you don't know the classes well enough, and he does some spell, and you're what the hell is that guy? I kind of like that idea of not genuinely not knowing.
We still do want to be careful, because like we talked about in the Session 0 episode, you could end up with characters that do not mesh well. Like a character whose whole family who's maybe royalty, and his whole family was killed by assassins. You don't want him squatting up with an assassin.
That
happened
to me. I was in a Descent to Avernus game briefly, and I told my DM I want to play this girl who absolutely hates nobles, hates anything to do with royalty, traumatic backstory, was abused by nobility, her family, whatever. The entire party that she was with was
Oh no.
Oh my god.
princes, nobles, knights, high priest, the entire party. And I was like,
Jeez.
Sinclair would absolutely not want to be a part of this. So I told my
Yeah.
DM on the side, I said, I'll continue to play Sinclair, but just so you know, I'm going to be trying to mess them up every chance I get.
I feel like that's definitely on the DM at that point. He either should have, like, even if he didn't want you to, like, know the other party members, he should have said something to the effect of, I don't think that concept will mesh well. I think it'll create problems. Maybe we can work it something else out or do another character.
Right.
Because that's just not a fun situation. Because either you're basically having to completely change your character and act out of character, or you're just having a bad time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess sabotaging the party, but that doesn't sound ideal either.
I have another question for you guys. If you guys are ready to move on to another kind of topic.
Hell yeah.
I just thought of this.
Absolutely.
How do you guys feel about? Because I've heard a lot of instances of people doing homebrew where elves are these evil tyrants, and then the DM says nobody can play an elf. How do you guys feel about DMs for the purposes of world building or story building banning certain classes or characters from their players?
I've run into this on several occasions where I've been told, you can't play things. And in the first iteration of my campaign, the story was Dragonborn specifically were not supposed to be played. There was a whole big thing. They just didn't exist in the world, and if they did, they were extremely rare and in hiding. And I had a player approach me and said, I really, really want to try a Dragonborn. I don't have another campaign. And I altered my whole story just to fit in his Dragonborn.
Oh wow.
So that's the kind of person I am. But I did put, like, I don't like orcs. Half orcs are fine. I don't like orcs. And I have had a few players try to play orcs. So, and Kenku. I don't know what it is about Kenku. I hate them. I hate them with a passion. They don't exist in my world. I don't allow them. Nope. I hate them.
What's wrong with Kenku?
So
Strong feelings.
it's really bizarre. I don't know. I wish I knew what it was about them that I hated, but
I think you're more lenient of a DM than even I am, and I consider myself a lenient DM. I feel like if I came to my group and said, like, hey, you can't be a Dragonborn, and someone said, but what if? I'd be like, no, man, that's the setting. Like, I said no. I feel like, if you're setting up for your players, that's sort of your buy-in, right? That's your general setting. And sure, there's wiggle room. There always is. I feel like maybe I would have been like, okay, you're a Dragonborn, but you're the last of your family. So, like, you don't have to tweak too much of your world. And even then, like, if another party member said, I want to be a Dragonborn too, and I'd be like, nope. I already kind of made an exception.
That's kind of what I did in that regard. I altered the story heavily because it was supposed to be centered around these Dragonborn being murdered, and he wanted to play Dragonborn, so instead of having them all gone, I just isolated them to one tiny island that it's very, very hard to get to. So I said, then I went through the whole thing of, like, what's your character doing off his island? Why is he venturing into a world where he's known to be hated? So there was that, but
Yeah. No, I feel it.
But in terms of banning specific races and, like, classes and stuff, it typically depends on what I'm doing with the campaign. And I am a very lenient DM. Yes, I am. I'm too nice because I like everyone to be happy and have fun.
I think my own personal opinion on this is that making small alterations to, like, kind of core content, like getting rid of a race because they were, driven to extinction, or taking out a class, or maybe something like that. Like, small things here and there, I think are alright. But when it gets to the point where it's like, I'm doing a no magic setting, so nobody can play spellcasters. I start to feel like, well, maybe it's a different system is for you, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I've even said that same thing. Like, I'm kind of knocking around the idea of a no magic setting, and that definitely is kind of a hard sell for a game like Dungeons and Dragons. I feel like maybe if your party really trusts you and you've played with them for a while, or your group rather trusts you, maybe you can convince them. But that's definitely a harder sell.
Mm-hmm.
So I am of the opinion, and I might have said this before, that constraints breed creativity. That is a big thing I believe in, both as a software developer and as a dungeon master. And so I think my opinions on this thought are, if you're a dungeon master and want to restrict some things off from your players, and your setting is unique and interesting, but has some prerequisites that prevent your players from being able to play particular races or classes, go for it. And if you're a player, I think if your dungeon master has set up their own huge homebrew world for you, it is sort of my opinion that I think it would be a good idea to sort of respect that. And if they cut off your favorite race from you, that I think it is worth asking them about it. But if they, put on the hard cutoff and say, no Kenku, I hate them, then I think they're completely within their right to do that.
I agree.
Sorry, I did have a DM one time who I played with, and he was like, sure, you can play a Tabaxi, but if you do, I'm going to kill your character off because I hate that.
You see, that's the wrong way to do it.
I was like,
oh. Just don't let him play it. What?
Yeah, and then it was like there was no reason besides the hating. And then the more I played with this guy, the more bias he had against other things. He's like, oh yeah, I don't like that race either, and I don't like that race, and I don't like
Did
that.
Did you kill
race.
that character?
What?
I never played any of his unfavored races, but apparently there were a couple that he just like killed off right away.
Weird. That's such a weird way to go about it.
Mm.
Very small side note, Nathan, I totally agree with that statement about restriction breeds creativity. I sort of purposely write myself into corners when it comes to writing campaigns. Like, if I have grand overarching ideas for plot, but I don't know how to start approaching them, I kind of like throw out clues or evidence or plot threads to force myself to narrow them down. If you know what I mean.
Exactly.
Because if it's the broader the horizon is, the less idea I have of what the hell to do.
Yeah, sort of like the whole idea with that sort of mindset is that the narrower your capabilities are, the fewer options you have, the more creative you need to be to make them work. If you're only limited to a couple different races, but you have this cool idea you want to do, you sort of have to you have to put the work in to make that idea work. Some of the most fun characters I've played were characters where my DM sat me down and said, okay, here's my world, and here are the limits that I'm putting on you. You can't do this, you can't do this. You need to make sure you end up in this location at the start of the game. And it's like, all right, cool, I have all these things I need to work into my character that are just need to be built in now. And that forces me to put in the work to make it work, whereas other DMs are like, yeah, just do whatever you want. I'm like, yeah, cool, I got a lot of freedom, but sort of in the end, I oftentimes am not as satisfied with that character.
Yeah, to bring it back to our topic, I think that's a great thing to give your players, is a detailed, like as detailed as you can be, setting and like specifically what you want for them. It's something I always ask a DM when joining a new campaign, like, okay, what's your setting? Tell me everything I need to know. Give me all the pertinent stuff, because that gets the gears in my head turning. Something I wanna bring up, which I think is a very, very crucial part of character creation, is character flaws. I feel like too many players, particularly newer ones, don't even consider having flaws, and that's how you get these one-dimensional edgelords who seem perfect, but really boring. I don't know. There seems to be this kind of mindset that, like, for a role-playing game like this, you just want like a power fantasy, and I just want to be a badass with no flaws. But for one, like the way D&D is set up, you're gonna get a natural one eventually. You're gonna fuck something up. And beyond that, in a general character creation sense, you want a character that has some chinks in their mail or some I mean, it's character flaws, something that's inherently like a problem with them.
This is one of my favorite things. I love
Agreed.
character flaws. I think I put as much thought into a character's flaw as I do into their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it can even be something that, like, I get a little. I know we all get a little sad when our characters don't exactly get a lot of situations where their strengths come in handy and they get to shine. I kind of feel that same way about flaws sometimes, where if my character isn't thrown into a situation where his flaws are holding him back, it gets a little. I get a little sad, like the character's not living as much as I want it to. Like
Totally.
Yes.
that
Agreed.
Warforged I have is like, kind of typical. Maybe it's a little stereotypical robot where he's just really bad at social situations, and I love to have him just really hoo-ha in every like situation where like somebody says something and he just either takes it literally or just doesn't understand it at all and just like really just messes it up.
Yeah.
I'm a massive, massive advocate for character flaws. Give your character something to work on and work towards as a person. I feel
Yes.
like it's like Charles said, like we have so many two-dimensional edge lords and like stereotypes and tropes that exist because people are scared of putting flaws on their character. My very first character, I made her blind right off the bat.
Nice.
Ooh, that's a hard one.
Um, yeah, and um, it was a whole lot of finagling and talking with my DM, but for simplicity's sake, she wasn't true blind. Um, just because blind girl wandering around and adventuring by herself probably wouldn't work out too well, but here we are. But I'm again, huge fan of putting, like Willis said, as much thought into your character's flaws as their strengths. And I feel like another thing people shy away from, one of my best friends constantly is asking me, why do you have to make every character you have a traumatic backstory? What is with the tragedy? It gives them something to reflect on and something to work towards. The
I
traumatic
think that's yeah. Sorry,
the
go ahead.
the traumatic backstory just for me in a lot of regards is um a form of projection first and foremost.
Mhm.
Um and second, a um a way for your character to grow. It makes your character feel a little bit more alive in what they do and how they act and why a certain character might have a fear of the dark, why your character might not want to ever be around, like why your character has an adamant fear of being chained up, why your character has abandonment issues. Like it's just these little things that make your character feel a little bit more alive. And I'm a real big fan of getting to know your character on a
Yeah.
personal level. And when you get to know your friend on a personal level, they tell you like all their daddy issues and stuff. So like let your character be like your imaginary friend in a sense. Get to know them.
You
Uh,
you definitely touched on what I was going to mention. Just the idea that like these flaws don't have to be with your character at the end of the campaign, and maybe even ideally you work the character through it. But in a way, you're right. It's like other goals to work towards.
Something that I think needs to be said also about character flaws is to be careful with the flaws that make your character harder to get along and mesh with the party. Like, if you make a
Yes.
character whose flaw is they're a kleptomaniac and they're always stealing with the party, like it could work, but it's going to be really hard to have that character be with this party.
I think the tweak there is just they steal from anyone who's not the party.
I
Yes,
also am a
but
big
It's
fan
as
of
simple
could,
as that.
That could still get, on the nerves of the party if, like, every time they're going somewhere, this character is stealing something and getting the rest of the group in trouble. Like,
That's true.
It's one of those things that there's like tons of other like things that I can think of that like it could be something as simple as like, oh, my character's flaw is that they're a mute, and it's like, well, if they can't communicate with the party, that's going to make things really hard too. And it can work, but it's going to take a lot more effort, and it can go south really easily.
For sure. Nathan, do you have any thoughts about flaws?
I do. I think it's sort of a lot of what I was going to say has sort of been said already. Flaw needs to be something that holds you back in some way, but at the same time, you probably shouldn't do something that's causing your party undue harm. And I think one interesting way to think about it is a lot like people have been saying so far. Your flaw could be something that you're constantly working towards. Something I sometimes like to do is make my character flaw built into their motivation. You have a motivation that your character is going for. Make that something inherently flawed. Like revenge stories are a classic example of this. The old saying, if you're going out for revenge, dig 2 graves. Most revenge stories that we see in media end with the character realizing, no, this is wrong. This is justice is different than revenge, or I'll forgive you, or something like that. And that's a really good example. Is like they're inherently going for this violent, dark solution that will further the cycle of hate. And that can have some really interesting dramatic outcomes, and that's I think a good way to, if you're not great at making flaws, can be a good way to start it, because then you're getting 2 birds with one stone. You're getting a motivation, and you're getting a flaw that will have dramatic impacts on the way your character acts, because they're actively working towards this terrible solution.
Yeah. When I think about flaws, something I've started doing recently is thinking about quite literally the 7 deadly sins. And something fun you can kind of do is to, like, for any given sin, turn the dial either up to 11 or up to 1. For example, like, say you just have like a fighter and they're technically competent, right? You've got abilities, you're a competent fighter. So we dial into pride and let's take it down to a 1, right? So you're competent, but you have no self-confidence whatsoever. You don't think you can win fights. You technically probably can, and as a player you probably know you can, but maybe you avoid fights because you think you'll lose. And on the other side, turn it up all the way to max, you think you can win any fight, you get in trouble because of your loud mouth, and you think you can take on anyone when you probably can't. For every single one of those sins, I think it's really interesting to like adjust the scale for too high or too low.
That's actually a very interesting concept, and I never considered something like that before, but now I'm doing a lot of thinking on...
I only thought of it recently. In fact, while prepping for this episode. Like, I mean, you can take wrath. Are you, like, do you vow vengeance on every single person who's wronged you, or do you forgive everyone too easily? And there's lots of middle ground, obviously, but these are sort of the things I think about recently now.
I've sort of use 7 deadly sins every now and then while making characters. I think I rely on pride too much as a flaw, but it's just so much fun. It's just this general self-confident, cocky asshole. Yeah.
No, it's super useful.
Another good way to do it. Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, you go. I've been talking.
All right, yeah. It's I was gonna hop away from 7 deadly sins here, but another good way to sort of bake flaws into your character, sort of on, I guess, a beginner levels, just use your ability scores. I know we were talking earlier about throwing having a high intelligent character maybe is a little bit stupid, but think about like when you roll your stats up or you use your stat array, take whatever your lowest stat is and lean into it. Make your character stupid, make them a klutz. Low wisdom characters are my favorite thing to play. Just make bad decision after bad decision, and then charisma, of course. You could be really awkward, or you can be an asshole. Be careful with this one because of the aforementioned. You want to be somebody that you can get along with, but there's still a lot of things you can do with a low charisma character, and that could be something that's going to hold you back regardless because of those roles, and can still add some interesting dynamics between you and all the other characters.
I think there's, even while looking at stats, there's still ways you can flavor it to be more unique. For example, like when you look at charisma, you tend to think of the suave, handsome, silver tongue characters, but have your charisma be like give you something like a Michael Cera character who's very awkward but still endearing, because that's charismatic to be like awkward and kind of shy. Like I can see that working.
A
On the
lot
other
of
hand,
oh, sorry, go on.
I forgot. I was just gonna give some other example. Like you can just change things up. Look at your stats a different way.
Well, I was gonna say, in on the charisma line is a lot of people forget that intimidation is a charisma-based skill.
Hmm.
You can just make your character have no talking skills, but when they pull out that dagger and they roll intimidation, everyone's gonna be afraid of them.
Yeah. I think because we gotta wrap kind of soon here. Something I think about is with these flaws and building a character in general, you want to build a character who is capable of change. I feel like that's one of the most important aspects of a character. No interesting character is static and does not change throughout the entire story, right? Ideally, you want a character who is completely different to the level 1 character you rolled in with. Maybe, I mean, not completely, but you know what I mean.
You want to be able to like look back at them
completely
at the end
changed.
of the game and say, "Wow, that's quite a journey we went on."
It's an evolution, yeah.
Think of like season 1 Zuko and season 4 Zuko from Avatar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fun change to look back on, and that's sort of what I look forward to with characters.
And the thing is, like, that's a great example because there's, even from the earliest episodes with Zuko, there are the seeds of change in him. He's clearly at conflict with a lot of other people within the Fire Nation, and it doesn't come out of nowhere that he leaves the Fire Nation. You sort of understand and are with him every step of the way to understand his decision to eventually leave. So I think Zuko is a great example of a character who is built to change. I want that on a t-shirt. Built to change.
All right, on it.
Hey, I guess one other thought I have is because there's a lot of little things you can tag on a character to flesh them out a little bit. I think about hobbies a lot.
Ooh.
Yes.
No real person in real life has no hobbies. Like, everyone reads or plays video games or does botany or cooks or something. Like, your character should have a hobby. So what do they do in their downtime? And if it's, I sharpen my sword, it's like, well, okay, you're boring. Like,
he's got a lot of swords. It's fine.
This blade is my favorite. They're all the same.
I like to think of like what arts is my character into? Like, does he like music? Does he cook? Does he draw?
That was
Does he
something.
play Dungeons and Dragons?
It's too meta.
I'm sorry, Humans and Houses.
There we go. With the character that I had, that was the Warforged Druid. This is something that I thought was kind of funny with the hobbies. Just kind of going through the proficiencies, and it was like I usually don't put much thought into them. But I noticed that like cooking utensils was kind of one of the proficiencies that you could have for tools, and I was like, oh my god, what if this robot is proficient in cooking, but like can't eat? Like,
Oh,
Oh
yes.
my god,
That's interesting, yeah.
I love that.
and so there hasn't been a whole lot of opportunities because nobody needs to eat in this campaign. But he's a robot that cooks for other people, but he doesn't eat.
Imagine you're
Now
a
they're-
robot that loves cooking but can't eat, and you're so excited to go cook for all your friends, and you finally meet your forever party, and none of them eat either.
Yep. And I was kind of swinging between like, is he really good at cooking, or is he really bad at cooking? Like, loves to cook, but just
It's
doesn't.
not like he can taste test
Yeah,
it.
he can't taste it, so he doesn't ever know. It's kind of like Bender in that episode of Futurama where he's like cooking for everybody, but it tastes like garbage.
These spices are mathematically measured to be the perfect ratio of flavorfulness.
Yes.
God, this tastes like ass. It's math.
On top of hobbies, there's a lot of small tweaks and just things you can consider to maybe like help get the ball rolling and the gears turning for a character. Like, I usually think about intelligence, and I know that's like a stat, but kind of like we said, are they like, I don't know, just do I want to play them as a smart person or someone who at least acts smart? I think about hygiene. Are they very clean and cleanly, or do they not really care about getting covered in monster guts? I think about the style of their clothing, and like there's so many little things I think you can think about to tweak a character. Like honestly, if you just do some self-reflection about yourself and the things you like and dislike, and then play with those and then throw them in a character.
I don't know if we have enough time, but something I think we kind of skipped over a little bit is characters' family and relationships that exist prior to the campaign.
Oh, we didn't talk
Glad you
about
brought it
tying
up
them to the world.
because I was gonna talk about that too. Do you wanna lead us in? What you got? I got some thoughts.
So I think it's an important part of getting your players to keep your players and characters from becoming murder hobos. Is they've got to have a tie to the world, and that's something that you can even like require in the beginning with those first kind of three things that we talked about. Why they're adventuring and all that whatnot is what ties them to the mortal, plane. Do they have family? Do they have a wife,
Friends,
a husband? Yeah. Who do they know in this world?
Yeah, that's a super important. I also think about like past relationships romantically, because if your character is the age between like 20, 30, right, or even older, I feel like it'd be pretty unusual for you to never have been involved in a relationship. And obviously, there's exceptions. You can be asexual or just have never done it. But consider like previous girlfriends or boyfriends they've had. Like they more than likely they have had one. I had a character who had an ex-wife, and running into her was one of the most memorable moments for that character. But yeah, like if they have no attachments to anything, that's how you get edgelord murder hobos.
There's a reason that in the player's handbook and the personality trait section, one of the 4 things it asks for is bonds. It's your character was born in this world and they've lived in this world. Where have they been and what lives have they touched along the way? What lives have touched theirs? That's something that's very important and will let you really get yourself immersed in either the DM's world or Forgotten Realms if you're just playing modules, and that's I think a very important step. That's like a quarter of the steps.
For sure.
I also feel like there's a lot of, on the exact opposite spectrum, a lot of people who build a character with familial negative bonds, and they don't portray that right, and that's again how you get murder hobos and edgelords, which is like, I ran away from home because dad is mean.
Yeah.
I think I prefer that to having like no concept for it, because you can still play with that.
Yes, you absolutely can, but my purpose for bringing up the negative side of it was I lost my train of thought.
I think I know what you mean though. Like it doesn't encourage them to care about the world outside of the party.
No, it's not only that. It's having a negative
negative ties to characters.
Thank you. Wow, negative ties to I just words. Having negative ties.
I broke your train of thought, so.
Yes, it's fine. Having negative ties to their family encourages, like, if they, for example, I have a character who ran away from home. She completely left her continent, went to a new place, and if they ever have to go back to that continent, the party's going to be like, oh, we have to go here for reasons X, Y, and Z. She's going to be adamant about, I don't want to go there. If you guys go there, I'm staying on the ship. Like, I'm not going with you. And that's going to bring up a lot of questions. Why don't you want to go there? What's going on here? And if her family figures out that she's nearby, like, they're going to go after her.
Oh, boy.
Not necessarily in a bad way, but just, like, I feel like it gives the DM something to work with, and it gives the party, like, do we take this risk if the family wants to kill her and us? Or do we just ignore it?
Well, I think that's sort of a question of direction versus magnitude. I think it's a good direction to take your character, and like they've got negative ties in the city. Their families after them. They have
Yes.
debts to the Thieves Guild. But I think the magnitude is the issue. It's either the player is the character is far too much against going there, or the threat that they need to go to the city for is not great enough to make them overrule that. Because I think that's some really cool drama. It's like, oh shoot, the
Absolutely.
MacGuffin is in the city. We need to go get it, but our wizard is, owes lots of debt to the mafia, and they have to work around that. But if it's to the point where it's like, nope, I refuse to go in there, and nothing is worth going back to that city, then it's sort of like, well, then we got a problem.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of inter-party conflict, and I'm a big fan of inter-party conflict getting resolved. So
Yes, that's
Yeah,
the
yep.
key.
Yeah.
yes, that's why I bring that up. Is if my girl goes there, I want the party to be like, we literally have to go in here. It's gonna be 20 minutes in out, quick mission. It'll be fine. And then it's not 20 minutes, quick mission in out. It's a problem because I'm a big fan of causing drama and chaos in every place I go, in every
Big
campaign.
same.
Charles.
Yes, I know. One of my hands down favorite moments I've had as a player was instigating a kiss for a character that was involved in a love triangle. And God, that the fallout was an entire session of no combat, just RP of people working through their feelings, and it was the best shit ever. It was horrible. I loved it.
Really glad Locke thinks things got smoothed over.
Yeah, everything's fine now, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, sure.
we gotta wrap pretty soon here. We're over.
If I have a passing comment or a ending comment about the family bonds and things like that, is I think it's important that you have at least a few that are alive. Like, you can have a bunch of bonds, but if they're all dead, it's really hard for your DM to go anywhere with that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. My final thought, I guess, would be it's kind of suiting because this is what I tell my players when they're about done. Think of what your character would wish for if they had a wish, and if you don't know, I don't think your character is ready. I think it should be pretty easy to answer what their greatest wish is.
I guess.
Any final thoughts from Nathan?
Yeah, I would say this is something we didn't touch on, but probably should have. Make sure that your character's backstory is not more interesting than the campaign.
That's a good one.
Make sure that you don't want to be. If you come to the table with a character that says, "I was the king of the nation of Gondor and I slayed thousands of orcs and a dragon," and you're showing up with a level 1, you're wrong.
I was gonna say, and I'm level 1.
Yeah, it's make sure you're scaled properly for the character, and don't make a backstory more interesting than the game you're about to play. This is their story. That was not. That was just the first chapter.
Well, yeah, that's a small thing to say. Like, this is like your backstory should be like the setup for a character, and the campaign is your character's story.
Yep.
Like in turn, this is the life defining event is the campaign, not what happened before.
If somebody made a movie about your character, it would be this game, not their backstory.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless Karma's got some last thoughts in general.
Play more druids.
God damn it. Well, I think that's an episode. Thanks for listening, everyone. Don't forget, if you go to our Twitter, we're the Order of Initiative on Twitter. You can submit a question, and maybe we'll answer it on an episode. Next week, we're going to be back and talking about something that ties into this episode, character death. I'm very excited for that one, honestly. Maybe as a final note, when you make a character, prepare for them to end. This is D&D, and they can die, so... But we're definitely going to have a lot to say about that next week. So I hope to see you guys again next week. Bye-bye.
See ya. Thanks for joining us, Karma.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for...
Thank you so much, Karma. It was great.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Toodaloo.
We out of here.